Okay, to answer question 40 from the Advanced Algebra 2 homework, you definitely have your book open. You need to read along. It says the volume in cubic feet of a CD holder can be expressed as V of x is equal to a negative x cubed minus x squared plus 6x. Or when factored as the product of its three dimensions, the depth is expressed as 2 minus x. So that's important. The depth is equal to 2 minus x. Then it says assume that the height is greater than the width. And part A says to factor the polynomial to find linear expressions for the height and the width. Now we already have the depth. We need the height, and we also need the width. So to factor this, the first thing we always look for is a GCF. As far as the GCF is concerned, you can either pull out just an x, or in this case, maybe a negative x. We'll leave this with x squared plus x minus 6. So now when we factor, we have a negative x and x plus 3, x minus 2. Now as far as this negative goes, this negative on the outside, x here is representing one of our dimensions, either height or width, and it can't be negative, so we have to get rid of the negative. In order to get rid of this negative, we have to distribute this negative over one of these sets of parentheses, each term inside, but only one. And the one we're going to distribute over is the second one, because we know the depth has to be 2 minus x. And if we distribute this negative across this binomial x minus 2, it becomes negative x plus 2, or 2 minus x. So we're going to rewrite this as x. It's still x plus 3, and this is now going to be positive 2 and a negative x. So now what we do is we have our dimension depth, and it says that we have to assume, in the question of the directions, it says that we have to assume that the height is greater than the width. Well, in this case, x plus 3 is always going to be larger than x, and it says that the height has to be greater than the width. So this is going to be x plus 3, and this is going to be x. So that answers question part A. Alright, it then says in part B to graph the function and find the x-intercepts, and what do those represent? Well, if we were to graph this, let's just go ahead and do that here. You'll want to do this in your calculator. Y is equal to x times the quantity x plus 3 times the quantity 2 minus x. Now remember, that's factored form, not standard form. But when we graph this, what we can do, we'll zoom in here. And what we see, it says to find the x-intercepts, and the x-intercepts are 2, 0, and negative 3. What do those represent? I mean, they represent the zeros of the function. Also, the 0 to 2, those represent the possible values of x, or the domain of x. So we've answered really all parts of that question. The reason being, think of, okay, this is a function for volume, so volume's on the y-axis. Volume can't be negative, plus x, which is a dimension in terms of, inches, length, width, height. It can't be negative either. So from here over doesn't make sense. Gives us a negative volume and a negative, width. From 0 to 2 makes sense. 0 can't be included because, again, the width would be 0. We wouldn't have that dimension anymore. And if it was 2, the depth would be 0. So the domain here would be between 0 and 2. So when it says to graph the function, find the x-intercepts, and what do they represent? They represent the zeros, or in this case, the domain. In part C, this says to describe a realistic domain. So for part C, a realistic domain could be written several ways. In interval notation, the domain could just be 0 to 2, or x is less than 2, but greater than 0. Either one of those is fine. And then it says to find the maximum volume of the CD holder. Now, unfortunately, this program can't find the maximum value, but what we can see is that maximum value is a little bit above 4. And you should be able to do that on your calculator. It's approximately 4 point something. And just graph this in your graphing calculator in second trace, which is calculate the relative max of this function, and you'll be able to tell what the optimal x would be in order to attain that particular volume. And that's how you answer question 40 from the homework.